Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Contract Revolution. This is your host, Benji, and we are back on the AI hype train again. Specifically, how it will help and or hinder your hiring and talent acquisition. It's like, sure, ChatGPT can help you write job postings faster. Cool, we get it. If you're the type of smart contractor who listens to this show, you've known that for some time now. But this whole conversation is much broader than that, as AI's impact on how and who you hire is only beginning to spool up. So to help us understand this emerging technology and how it will affect arguably the most critical facet of your business, we're joined by Jonathan Whistman, author of The Sales Boss and founder of WhoHire, which is an AI-enabled recruitment tool that's completely rewriting the playbook on team building. And today we explore questions like, are personality tests like DISC and Myers-Briggs even relevant anymore? How do big data and in-person interviews come together to help you make the best personnel decisions possible? Do entrepreneurs overestimate how good of a judge of character they actually are? And lastly, what does the world of hiring look like in 10 years at this current rate of innovation? This is a great conversation, guys. I hope you enjoy it. Let's dive in with Jonathan.
You're watching Contractor Evolution, where we unpack the systems, tactics, and skills you need to take your fast-growing contracting business to the next level.
You're here to learn what it takes to scale up, work less, and increase profitability. You've come to the right place.
Stay tuned to learn what separates the new breed of contractor from the old school, and welcome to your ultimate guide on the business of contracting.
Jonathan, thanks for coming on the show today, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So for the listeners, can you just give us a brief run through of your background and then maybe more so the work you do now with WhoHire?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm best known as the author of The Sales Boss, where I've helped organizations build, train, manage sales teams, and done that across a variety of industries. But I got my start way back when with, if I was going to put myself through college, I was going to pay for it. So I started a cleaning company of all things and realized really quickly I wasn't a great cleaner, but I knew how to sell. So I built that business, sold it for just under a couple of $1 million. And then promptly lost it because I thought I knew everything about business. So I really applied myself to business and realized that business is all about the people. My grandfather used to say business would be easy if it wasn't for the people. So I've been spending my time lately with a product called WhoHire, which is a technology platform that is AI enabled. I know that's sort of the rage now, but we've been doing that for 7 years, really in this area of how do you predict how somebody's going to do on your team? And more importantly, how do you make that hiring process fast, smooth, human, so that you can bring people on board in a fast way, but also make sure that you're getting top talent.
Jonathan, how we didn't prep this, but I'm curious because you brought it up. Like, what happened post sale where you say you lost it all? Well, what mistakes were made and what lessons were learned?
I really opened myself up. You know, they say, like in a court of law, never bring something up unless you know the answer. It was actually just dumb mistakes of trusting people. And, you know, I grew up poor, so I thought I knew everything. You know, to me, you know, $10,000 was a lot of money. And so I just felt like I had an endless amount of money. And so every idea that came up, I thought, oh yeah, I'll do that. And I was a very trusting of people.
Interesting.
So that was the primary issue at the time, is just not really thinking through the complexity of business and being scattered.
Lesson learned.
Yeah.
So kind of like you said, AI is sort of all the rage right now. It certainly feels very buzzwordy. There's 1,000,001 podcasts talking about it right now. We're no different. I'm curious if we can just start with a very open-ended question, which is when it comes to the hiring landscape, the team building landscape, HR more broadly, how is AI changing that right now? What are some of the big things we need to be aware of as business owners?
You know, I think it's going to touch every aspect of hiring, but I think that most of the business owners that I talk to, they think in terms of the company using AI, and what they don't recognize is your job seekers are also using AI. So tons of tools out there where I can, you know, load up the job posting. I can put in my LinkedIn profile, and I can have AI craft me the perfect, compelling cover story. It can answer all of your questions correctly. And so it's really tough for somebody trying to hire somebody to understand that is what I'm looking for, in the traditional job application process, actually reflective of who's going to show up in my company.
Are there any other examples of clever ways that job seekers are using it, applications, ways that people are finding utility with AI? Like, what else do contractors specifically need to know about this emerging trend?
Yeah, are you talking about it from the applicant
Yeah,
standpoint,
from the applicant standpoint.
Yeah, I think that primarily where I'm seeing them use it is exactly that, just really customizing their answers to the job application.
Yeah.
Using AI. And to be fair, employers erect so many barriers, right? Because if you put out a job ad on Indeed, you put it out in your social, you're going to get a lot of unqualified candidates, people that should have never applied, applying to your organization. So a contracting company puts up a lot of hurdles for those candidates to get through. And so what we see happening is candidates want to spend less and less time and effort to at least get some sort of interaction going, because employers are ghosting candidates as often as candidates are no-showing and ghosting employers. So they're mass applying to a lot of jobs. In fact, sometimes even doing some of that on an automated basis, just to sort of get through that initial hurdle.
And so with that said, like, what's the practical takeaway? What's the practical advice for contractors having to sort of deal with this, let's say, much louder, much noisier space as a result of these tools?
I would suggest that the best way to improve the hiring process is to be really personable and to spend less time focused on what is their job history, how do they answer questions in a resume, and really, capturing and the data around what makes a great hire in my organization, know what I'm looking for, use tools for that data. But secondly, make it human. So I'm actually speaking with and experiencing the person earlier in the process, and anything that can be automated, that I automate that so it's not overwhelming my team.
That's a really interesting comment. Is it too simplistic to say this has sort of pushed down or reduced the value, the validity, the authenticity, and therefore the relevance of the traditional resume from the perspective of the business owner?
Yeah, I encourage people to spend almost no time looking at a resume, because it's a work of fiction in many cases. And even when it's truthful, it's the most polished version of truthful that there is. And there's a ton of research that says that somebody's resume is really not reflective of how they're going to show up in your organization.
Hey everyone, making hiring mistakes sucks. It's expensive, it's embarrassing, and it's just overall not a good time. Now, one way to dramatically reduce the odds of mishiring is to follow a behavioral interviewing framework. And we have purpose-built one for contractors, and you can have it for free. It's our way of saying thanks for listening. So download it using the link in the description. Stop hiring knobs. It's as simple as that.
From the business owner's perspective, I think most of us know by now that ChatGPT can help you make better job postings, or you give it a prompt and then you kind of give it a few re-prompts and you're able to pare something down. Maybe you give it a basic paragraph and it expands on it. I think most people kind of know that use case. Are there other newer, more interesting, more clever, more dynamic places in a hiring funnel for the business owner that AI can be deployed?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of opportunity there. Fundamentally, I think what we need to address is, it's sort of like when Google as a company, right, has become a verb. So we say we're going to Google something. And I think when people refer to AI, what they're really thinking is ChatGPT.
That's right.
Right? And AI is not ChatGPT. ChatGPT is just a large language model. It's one very small function of AI. So I think the business owner needs to not get caught in that trap. When you're thinking about AI, artificial intelligence, it's really at its very core is just advanced pattern recognition and being able to do that at scale. So I liken it to, have you ever gotten in an airplane and you're, taking off from an airport, and when you're just coming up off the runway, you sort of see the buildings around you, really can't tell much, right? But when you get high enough, all of a sudden you can start seeing the patterns. If you're in the Midwest, you see these big round fields and you're like, oh, those are cornfields. And you start gaining perspective. And that's what AI allows us to do, is it's just able to look at things at a height and a breadth that the human mind's not capable of, and recognizing patterns that we're not necessarily able to recognize. So now, how does that apply to the hiring process? Well, human beings are one of the most complex things on the planet. And yet there's this whole field of psychographic studies, right? You're probably familiar with Myers-Briggs, DISC, all of these, what people call personality tools. And that's really about 30-year-old science based on introversion and extroversion. But if you look at science, there's over 500 stable human traits that don't change dramatically over time. And now we have the ability to apply that simply to every single hire, because AI has enabled us to recognize patterns that we couldn't before. It's just like in the field of healthcare. Now they're doing cancer research where they're feeding, every instance of cancer and the treatment into a database, and you're able to input your patient's diagnose or their testing, and we're able to, with a pattern, say this is likely the treatment to be most successful. That you can apply that right now today in your HR. That's sort of what we're doing in the WhoHire space, is to look in the world of contracting, whether that's builders or HVAC, plumbing companies, electrical companies, and say, hey, what makes up a good technician? What makes up a good dispatcher? A combination of success in a role is who makes up the people. And if you looked at I always say, if you looked at a room full of kids beating on pots and pans, there's a certain subset of those kids that with the right training and the right opportunity, they're going to play at Carnegie Hall. And there's other kids that no matter the training you give them, no matter the opportunity, they probably should sing in the shower, maybe, a Friday karaoke after 3 beers, but certainly not Carnegie Hall. And we have the power with the AI to be able to decide those things.
Do you think that business owners commonly overestimate how good they actually are at assessing, interviewing, talent finding, and selecting people when they make decisions to bring people on their team? And if so, expand on that.
Yeah, we all tend to trust our gut and intuition, and our gut and intuition is really important. However, we have a recency bias. And so when you look at almost any leader in an organization, almost every leader says, hey, I'm a good judge of character. I have an ability to hire great people. Just give me time with them and I'm going to be able to figure that out. However, what happens is when somebody comes into our team and they churn out, as an example, in some contracting companies, if you look at their turnover rate, like how many W-2s do they issue at the end of the year compared to how many people they have on their team, sometimes there's like a 60% delta. They have a 60% turnover rate. But when somebody doesn't work out, it's always related to the individual, whether they were lazy or they had this issue or that issue, or we lost them to a competitor, or, that generation just doesn't want to work anymore. And rarely do we pin it on the person making the hiring decision that their gut and intuition was wrong. When they knock it out of the park, they pat themselves on the back, right? And so they're always tallying in that winning column. There was a great study that was done that just used automated hiring and assessments and questionnaires to hire people. And they ran that as a split test where the assessment was allowed to do the hire. And then they brought in managers and they allowed managers and the assessment to look at it. And you would think, well, that would up your odds. And what they actually
two brains
found
is better than one. Yeah.
That there was actually a decrease as soon as a manager got involved. And the reason is that we have biases. And we'll intellectually say, yeah, I know I'm biased, but we're very unaware of how that shows up. I'll give you a recent example. Even in my own case, outside of the world of hiring, I got asked to serve on a board where we're handing out sponsorships for college applications. And so, young people in need were applying. We read their applications. Then we sat down and did an interview. And it was amazing with the 4 people that were in charge of that, how much of your own bias shows up? Like you could read a little something in a resume about something they did for sports, or, maybe they went through some childhood trauma. Everybody had triggers that sent them down a different pattern of thinking about the very same human.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows up in the hiring process. Somebody comes in, and you've probably experienced this, where you instantly connect with them, right? And there's that rapport.
Totally.
And it's sometimes hard for us to put our finger on why that is. And sometimes it has nothing to do with actually how they're going to perform in the role.
You're so right about this tendency to sort of pat ourselves on the back with the wins, and then sort of have selective memory with the losses. I was at a conference earlier this year, and I was sitting at a table. It's sort of one of these, round table chit chat things. We go around and talk about a certain subject, and this guy who I don't remember his name. I don't know him personally, but he's kind of like had some swagger, a little more cocky, and he sort of made this statement to the group that like he didn't make hiring mistakes. And he was at the event with his office manager or operations lead who, had been in the business for a while and knew him quite well. And she kind of like, slided over to me after the table got up and like gave me the side eye and go like, that's not true. He makes hiring mistakes all the time. And I was like, I'm kind of poking fun of the guy, but I do it too. I think we all do. We're like, we get somebody new on the team who's a rock star, and we're just like, man, I'm like the GM of a football team. I just have such an eye and such a sense for this. But we certainly forget a lot of those like first round picks that are out of the league a year later. There's something going on there.
And usually it's worse than a flip of a coin, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how somebody will do in the hiring. Here's an interesting thing. Think about the companies that you work with, in your consulting business, or the companies that you've been a part of. Hiring, everyone will say our people are our most important asset. Like without our people, we're nothing. And yet, when it comes to the cost of bringing somebody in and having them not perform, so we've brought them in, we've trained them, we've invested the time, material, energy, that cost actually doesn't end up anywhere on a line item on the P&L, and usually is never tracked to a person who made the decision. And so it's sort of that dirty secret that's in the background. It doesn't show up as a cost to anyone. It's sort of a generalized cost of doing business, like a recruiting cost. And it doesn't ever belong to an individual, right? So you're not having to go back and account for the decisions that you made as a hiring manager.
I've never thought of it that way. That's an incredibly interesting point, and you're totally right. The truth gets obscured because there isn't a direct receipt that your bookkeeper tracks and then puts into QuickBooks and you can see exactly what you spent. It doesn't work that way because the cost is basically there. You might actually see your spend on recruitment, but what you don't see is the team time that got absorbed to get this person up to speed, to onboard, to orient, to train, to then think about, is this person the right person for 6 months, and agonize over the decision before they finally exit them. And then they have 2 months to get over it. And like, if you actually looked at the sum total there's an incredible amount of waste that we frankly just don't see on the P&L, like you say.
Yeah. And most of the time, the hiring manager will, when there's a problem, let's say they churn out within 90 days, it's always, well, there was something unknown that we couldn't have uncovered in the hiring process.
Yeah, totally. We just didn't see it. We just didn't see it. Yeah.
We didn't see it, which is just being intellectually dishonest. Because oftentimes if a hiring manager is honest with themselves, they have a job to do day to day, and it's not hiring people. Mm-hmm. Right? It's all the other fires they're putting out, they're growing their team, and they're probably, because that role they're hiring for is currently empty, they're probably working harder than they normally are with carrying that person's workload, right? They're overworked just by definition. And so oftentimes they're coming in at their point in the hiring process and they're doing their thing. Maybe it's that one interview. Mm-hmm. And they might just be grabbing up that resume and saying, oh yeah, I forgot I had a 1 o'clock interview. Who's this? Oh, Benji. Yeah, okay, great. And they sit down and they try to give that person their attention for the 30 minutes or the hour or whatever they've set aside. and then they're off to the races again for their next thing. They're making a decision that's arguably, in my book, I call it a $500,000 decision. If you had to write a check personally for $500,000 for every interview you did, the minute they walked out the door, if you placed your bet on them, you would take it much more serious. But you're in the busyness of running your contracting business, you're not really pausing to think, I'm making a $500,000 decision in this 30 minutes that I have with Benji or whoever's in the room.
We're a little more cavalier about it, and we certainly drink the glass half full juice when we're doing this. We see, there are corollaries with, dating and romantic relationships, friendships. We sort of tend to see the best in people, and it isn't until months later, sometimes years later, that we're confronted with the all too bitter truth. I'm curious, Jonathan, if you have any a philosophy, a framework, just even some thoughts from your business journey, from the work you now do and the data you now see with WhoHire. Any practical advice for people when it comes to exiting? I'm talking about hiring managers and leaders, shortening the time or making it easier or less expensive, more cost efficient to essentially accept the truth and get rid of people when they need to. Because I see in the Breakthrough Academy universe, people really belabor the process. They always go, I should have done it sooner. I knew for 6 months. I knew for 2 years, and then I finally did, and things are so much better. Is there how do we solve for that? Because it seems incredibly inefficient.
Yeah. So in hiring salespeople, I do this for sure. And I recommend people do it for every other role. I call it, what is the drop dead date and conversation? So for every role, if we're running our business well, we have KPIs for that role. And we know what is A-level performance, right? And we're only going to hire A-levels. I think companies have they sort of discount their A-plus players as being unicorns. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. You should only be hiring A players and people that are not A players yet, just because they don't have the experience. But fundamentally, their DNA, they're an A player, right? They might be that star athlete that just hasn't played at the NFL level yet. But by the time they get there, they're going to be a star player. So what is the drop dead date or thing? And so when I hire a salesperson, I always say to them, I'd be having a conversation with you, Benji, and I'd be, hey, Benji, I think you're the perfect person for this role. I'm excited, XYZ, right? And now I'm finally shifting out of that mindset of convincing you that you shouldn't take this job. And I'm, when in the hiring process, I always say it really should be about excluding. I should be actively trying to protect my existing team, and you're earning your spot on the team. But at some point when I'm switching to getting you on the team, I'm going to say, Benji, I love you for this role today. And here's what I know in 90 days from now, I'm going to love you even more because we have a great culture here. We're going to become good friends. But on this date, if we're not accomplishing these things, we're going to have a conversation that this is no longer fit for either of us. I'll still love you. But if you're a day late, $1 short, we're just going to part ways. Is that fair?
So you bake in the deadline and the KPIs, and sort of you kind of precede the conversation on the signing date. And I mean, is 90 days a safe rule for all roles? Does it? I'm sure maybe actually now that I think about it, it must change a little bit depending on the complexity of the position. So how do you come up with I think the KPIs are obvious, but how do you think about that actual date in the calendar?
Yeah. So, you were asking about how do you set that KPI or the date? And I go back to that's the diligence that the company needs to do on the front end. If we really believe we have a role for a human on our team, we owe it to that human and to ourselves to be really clear about what is the requirement, how do we define success, what does success look like? If you've done that well, it becomes very easy to say, this is our KPI and this is the timeline under which we need you to achieve that. We just have to articulate that out loud as a leadership team, and everybody has to agree. Because what's going to happen is when that date, you can put a flag in the sand, so to speak, and as that date approaches, everybody falls in love with that person.
Interesting.
And they're going to want to move it. They're going to say, well, let's just give them another month. So you have to have a pact with your leadership team to say, no. We agreed we're going to hire A players, and we have the capabilities on our team to bring a human into the business and have them performing at that level under that time period. So we have to hold ourselves accountable as a leadership team, and then we can hold the human accountable. I take hiring really seriously because you're bringing a human, and I use the term human because I don't like this human resource. It's not an interchangeable. We burn through it.
Right.
That person has a family. They have their own thoughts, their feelings, their dreams about what they want to accomplish. And when they sign up with us, we have an obligation to them. And when we churn out poorly, we've actually set their life apart. Now, I'm not excluding them from their own responsibility for success, but I want to make sure that it isn't something my team did.
Yeah.
That we misaligned on convincing this person they could do the job and they were a fit for our culture, and then they weren't.
Yeah.
Like, we can fix that on the front end. And by the way, if you're churning over 40, 50, 60%, I'll tell you something else that's happening on your team. You have a whole host of A players who sit on the sideline when you hire a new person. They're like, well, let's wait and see how they do before we jump in and help them.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Because they don't want to spend a ton of time and energy training that person and nurturing that person along only to have them churn out.
I love this idea of drop dead date. It reminds me of I don't know if you've read Principles by Ray Dalio. I do really love his books. There is a section in Principles. The first bit, he talks about kind of life principles. The second, he talks about work principles. This is under the header of work principles. And it's an idea about management and performance management with people. And he's talking about personnel decisions, and specifically this one situation where there will be moments in your career as a leader where you will have someone who is in fact improving. Like, if you plot their results on the chart, the graph is going up and to the right. And so you might think that's good, but in certain positions and in certain environments, in fact, most environments, you have to do this incredibly challenging mental math sometimes, which is basically about the steepness of the curve. In other words, how fast are they improving? And are they going to clear the hurdle that they need to clear by the time they need to clear it for this person in this position to really be a stable asset for the business long term? The point of it is if the shape of the curve is not that way, you do need to make sometimes a preemptive decision. And that's very, very hard. And the math is tricky, and you're kind of squinting at it to say, well, maybe they could be here by June, but if I'm really honest, I don't think they will be. And I like the idea of a drop dead date as sort of a forcing function to just say very clear, very concise, give yourself some accountability, your leadership team some accountability, because as you say, probably 3 months in, there's going to be rapport built. We're going to like the person. We're going to have these feelings about them. And that makes it even more blurry.
Yeah. Let's label up front that we're going to like them.
Yeah.
Right. Because most people are really good on cultural fit hire. I call it the inflated tire hire.
Right.
And what I mean by that, you think about 4 tires, right? A tire goes around smooth and fast when it's fully inflated. So if I have somebody come on, when they first join my team, they're not fully inflated yet. What happens when you have a tire, and you're going down the highway and you lose 30% of the air pressure in a tire?
Right. You can't steer, you can't brake. It's pretty dangerous, actually. And
you make the decision, I'm going to slow down.
Yeah.
So you have to acknowledge, if you have somebody on your team and you've brought them in and they're operating at 70% capacity instead of 100, you have slowed down not just their tire,
the whole vehicle.
There's 4 of them.
Yeah.
There are other departments that respond on it. Everybody has slowed down to that. So you have to decide, I'm going to bring this person in. If they're not all the way at A player, they don't have all the skills, whatever I need today. Okay. I have a great training program in place, right? You look at a company like A1 Garage, which I do a lot of work with, and they have a great program when they bring somebody in. They know in 60 days exactly they can take somebody with no skills to being able to perform at X level inside the garage. You have to have that baked in. That's where then you can look at your technology solutions to test for and move people quickly through a hiring process. And you're not really asking yourself, is this a good human or not? You're asking, can this human thrive under the timeline I need them to inside of my organization?
Many of our listeners, Jonathan, are big fans and big proponents of personality profiles and assessment tools. I would, to a large extent, consider myself in that camp too.
Add me to it, by the way.
Yeah. Are these things still relevant? How has this changing landscape either enhanced or detracted from the value of things like DISC, Myers-Briggs, PSI, the list goes on?
Yeah, great question. So, I write about all those tools in my book, The Sales Boss, and I'm a big proponent in them. What we have to recognize, though, is times have changed. You can imagine a roofer that, went out and nailed with a hammer and nail, even if they were really good at it. When the pneumatic hammer came out, like they either shifted, right, or they just got further and further behind. And we're sort of at that stage. If you're using tools like DISC, Myers-Briggs, those are great tools, but what they're good for is how is this person going to fit on my team and how do I coach and manage them? Because it's an external, how do they respond to the environment around them? It's considered the big five in psychology: introversion, extroversion. Some of them include some sort of cognitive intelligence. Some of them include sort of what are they interested in? What are their values, right? Because all of those are part of a human. But if you dive deep into the science, what you realize is there's no valid science to say this person does better because they're extroverted or introverted.
There isn't. There's not.
There's no science. There's no data to suggest that. Now, why do we see better results? And you'll have anecdotal evidence. People say, well, we brought in PI, we brought in this tool, and our hiring results improved. It's true for a couple of reasons. One is just by having a tool in place, everybody slows down.
Yeah.
They take a second look. There's a little bit of a placebo. Second, you're hiring people that you believe fit a profile for a job. As an example of, I just go to the world of sales because I've lived and breathed that. You could probably say, broadly speaking, if you had 100 people in a room and you were going to cut them in, half, and you're going to say, these are the introverts, these are the extroverts, you could probably say, I'm going to have a higher degree of likelihood of finding a great salesperson in the extrovert. Mm-hmm. And that's actually probably true, but it's a dull knife. You're also missing the 5 or 6 on this other side that are introverts that are going to 10x or 20x the results of the extrovert. So my point being is, why not use the latest scientific tools that are available, and then, by the way, add in your own data around what actually causes people to be successful in your organization. I'm a big believer that your IP is around the processes that you've built, right? Everything else, that makes up your business. But key to that also is what causes people to do well and thrive in our organization. That's your intellectual property. You should know. And you should have it baked in, codified inside of your hiring process.
I want to get into kind of your guys' models and how you guys do the calculations to make better decisions here. But I want to talk, I got to talk wardrobe first. So guys, the outfit today brought to you by Transformations Landscaping, owned by Jeff Babcock. They specialize in landscape construction and maintenance and snow management. Company's based in Chilliwack, BC, but he lives in Powell River, which is a few hours away. It's kind of cool. I think he runs this remotely now. I asked him how long has he been in the program. He's an OG member, been here since 2016. In that time, these are his words, I've gone from $250K in the hole on a $900,000 a year business to on track to over $7 million in rev with over $1 million in net. I asked him what the biggest change that we've made for him was. He said tracking the numbers and making the decision to run a business, not in the business. So Jeff, thank you for the outfit. I'm looking good in green today, emerald. Jonathan, what do you think of the look?
It looks great on you. Looks great. And with that brick backdrop, it just blends beautifully.
It's dry fit. We got a flex fit hat. It's a long sleeve. These are all the things I like. Thank you so much for the outfit, Jeff. And if you want to check out Breakthrough Academy, we systemize contracting businesses for growth. We work with over 600 businesses all over North America. You can learn more about us using the link in the description below this video or in the podcast app where you're listening. Okay, let's get back to this. You guys have did a skim of your website, Jonathan, and there's a line there that I liked. Fortune tellers of the trade world, but with less crystal ball and more data crunching. So how does your guys' model actually work? And if you can explain, this is going to be a fine balance between give us enough depth so that people get it. It can't just be buzzwords, but we can't go so deep that we lose everyone. So I'm going to let you figure out that tightrope walk.
Let me see if I can drive down that narrow thing, and I get where you're going.
Yeah.
Let's imagine that you went to a 5-star Michelin restaurant and you ate an amazing meal. And you said to yourself, man, what's that taste in there? And you sort of get in your mind what it is, right? And you go home and you want to prepare that exact meal. Let me ask you, would you have a better chance of doing that if you had a wider set of ingredients?
Like in my pantry?
In your pantry.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, of course.
For sure, right? And it's the blend of those, right? It's the ratio. It's not that it was salty, it's that salt was blended with sweetness and this other sort of, right? So making a perfect meal, and I'm going to substitute making a perfect hire, comes from having a really wide degree of things that we can select from. So our approach to making the perfect hire, or I should say predicting the perfect hire, is based on having a wide degree of ingredients. So I'm going to think about 2 buckets of data. On the left-hand side is everything that researchers coming out of our universities, it's this whole world of IO psychology, says we can measure about a human. We can measure introversion, extroversion. That's, your Myers-Briggs, your DISC. We can also measure grit. We can measure bounce back ability. We can measure hobo tendency. There is literally hundreds of ingredients. So we put all of our ingredients on the shelf. And then on the other side, the question is, well, which of those ingredients goes into this meal? If you were able to take that meal from a 5-star restaurant, take it into a lab and put it in a centrifuge and spin it and break out all the ingredients, you'd have a much better chance of making that meal. So how do we do that? I'll give you an example. When we went into HVAC plumbing, looking at dispatchers, technicians, we didn't look at our 400 and go, you know what, I think this one, hobo tendency, and extroversion, let's just pick these out randomly. We literally went in 4,000 individuals actively doing the job today, installing HVAC plumbing electrical units, selling HVAC plumbing electrical units, and we assessed them against a bunch of those 400 items. It's an hour-plus assessment each of those people doing the job today did. And then on the other end, we got their actual data. We got it out of records like ServiceTitan. We interviewed all their managers. We fed it into a pattern recognition AI engine to say, these are the 14 things, and here's the ratio. This is your recipe. Take it home, cook it. You'll have the perfect meal. We'll be able to tell you exactly how they ramp. So the output then, you get an applicant come in. We only look at them and say, do they have these ingredients? And is it in the right measure? Nope, they have too much salt. It's going to ruin the whole thing. We need salt. We just don't need that much. That's what we're trying to do. And then what we're doing is feeding that data back in. So every hire you make is your intellectual property. How did that human perform inside? So we're making a 0 to 100 prediction for the role for an industry. And then also what we call the turnover rate. So longevity, how long are they likely to stick and stay in that role? Because a good hire is sort of a blend of that, right?
Those are the 2 things you look at, basically, like what their anticipated productivity will be in this position. And then there's also something that you look at around their shelf life, their lifespan in the business.
Their churn rate, likelihood of churn, right? Because for a company, the magic ingredient is they can perform at the highest level and they're going to stick around long enough after I train them and develop them and put all the heartache and headache into getting them where I need them to be. For me to get a payoff.
So I love this like Michelin star meal analogy, but if we can just make this even more concrete, if a $20 million plumbing business, and I'm using sort of a medium size or bigger business as an example, because they'd probably have a big enough head count for you to have meaningful data, or whatever size would make sense for your model. If this plumbing company called you and they said, hey, we want to do this. We'd like to apply WhoHire. We'd like to have a much more keen understanding of who's going to ramp quickly, who's going to stick around, and who's going to be productive. Like, tell me, like, literally, what's the data that you would ask for from them? What would you plug it into? What would you be trying to pull out of it? And then what would the output be back to this plumbing business?
So there's two approaches. One is, we have a lot of industry data. So as an example, when we go into a new industry, like we went into HVAC plumbing, we partnered with Nexstar. They have 1,100 members. We got 35 of their member companies to participate in the science and development work. It took us 6 months, right, before we could actually start selling that. So if you come in as a HVAC plumbing contractor and you're small, or you're contracting and you're a small company, you don't have enough data right within your company, right? Mm-hmm. So we're gonna instantly allow you to use all of those off-the-shelf industry models. It's based on industry data. And then as you continue to hire, we're getting data from you on how they perform, because you have some sort of management structure in place where you're rating, how did that person turn out? Did they stay for a month? Did they stay for a year? So that's how we're starting with most companies. Mm-hmm. Now we get very large groups who come in and they say, we want you to customize something for us. It's just inside of our, four walls. And in that case, we're able to actually predict any KPI that they're really interested in, because we have such a controlled environment. So as an example, we have Mercedes-Benz Auto as a client. And because they have so much data and it's within their four walls, we're able to predict actual number of cars somebody's going to sell. So somebody's applying for a car salesman, we're going to say, this person's going to sell 50 cars, 40 cars, 20 cars. It's not perfect. We're within 15 to 20%. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that's a huge advantage and way better than somebody, looking at a resume and saying, I like Joe. I think he's going to be a great fit. So we can do dollar revenue, our large enterprise clients, all in one, in one. We can say their average ticket size is going to be $1,300 or $275,000. They're going to produce $500,000 a quarter. So the approach is just really how much data we have. I would say 90% of the people in contracting companies, they don't have enough data within their organization, so they have to use industry data. And that's why instead of predicting an actual dollar figure or units, we usually say 0 to 100 scale. Yeah. How are they going to perform in that role? And then also their tenure.
I got you. And I think in time, the data will become more centralized. Your knowledge and ability to predict will become better. Maybe it will become a dollar figure, what have you. But if I'm understanding this correctly, basically what you guys are doing is you're looking at large data sets of people in role. You're looking at their performance in that role you're cross-examining that against basically a questionnaire or a form or something akin to a disc profile, but maybe longer winded and asking different questions. And then you're using an AI tool to basically look at the big patterns between those two things. And then based on the connection points, you're asking new applicants to fill out a form. They complete that, and you look at that form compared to the historical data, and you say this is a match, this is not a match. I'm sure it's more complex than that, but we've got to keep it.
It's actually not any more complex than that. You captured it beautifully. Okay. We're not requiring our clients to do all that deep thinking, right? Because that's what our engine is designed to do. But you captured it exactly. If any of your listeners have played poker, you have a hand, and hands have statistical ratings. Yeah. And that's all we're trying to do. You're trying to get your best bet in on your best hand, right? And yes, there are the other players in the room. There's other things that, influence whether that statistically high value hand is going to play out. So as an example, same thing with humans. We could place our bet on a statistically high producing individual. They show up in our organization and they have a drug issue, they have financial trouble, they have relationship issues, and that's not going to show up in our questionnaire. You still have your other, due diligence that you have to do on a person. But what we're able to say is, all else being equal, if you're going to place a bet, these are the people that you have the highest degree of probability placing bets behind. And that's going to improve both your success rate in hiring people that stick and stay, but also people that perform at the highest level.
Is the DNA that's being analyzed, like, is it sort of simple stuff like introversion, extroversion, and do they have, are they goal oriented? Do they have, do they have tenacity? Do they have, I think most people are familiar with sort of like the basic list of 5 or 10, or maybe in some cases 20 traits.
There's actually, we have 500.
So this is way more refined. Like this is much more zoomed in and sort of high definition in terms of the resolution of the picture you're getting based on the questions you ask.
That's exactly it. I'll give you an example, and some of it's counterintuitive, right? So we did inside of an organization that was hiring a lot of commercial cleaners. And so we assessed a large team. We looked at all their performance, and we're trying to figure out what makes a cleaner that'll stick and stay and perform at a high level, because it's a high turnover job, even if you're paying well and everything goes well. They just, not many people look at cleaning as a career. But a lot of upside if they get it right. So we came back, and one of the data points came back was the more sincere a cleaner rates. Now this is in harmony, in conjunction with other traits, but the more sincere they are, the faster they're going to churn out of that role. And the less performance ratings will be at the appropriate level during the time of their tenure. That's completely counterintuitive.
Totally.
Like if you're interviewing people and they sit down and they come across as sincere, you actually are putting something in the plus column. You're like, oh, great. I need somebody on my team that's sincere. Well, it's true. You do want humans that are sincere. But in this particular role, doing this job, sincerity partnered with other things. I don't want anybody to get that it's, by itself, like just like a meal, it's not the salt by itself. With other things, actually, you could predict a higher turnover. And you always get a leader or manager says, well, why is that? Why is that true? And the fact of the matter is, why it's true doesn't matter as much as it is true.
Yeah, totally.
Right? You can have some assumption about why it is. And when we talk to the owners of the company, they're like, well, sometimes you have to sort of put on a false front when you're dealing with the other people in the business and their attitudes. And I can see how if they always have to speak your mind and that could be challenging. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
It
just matters that it's true.
Totally. Why it's true is less important than the fact that it is true.
So I want to give you one thing though, and this comes from the sales boss side of things, because not everyone's going to sign up and use heavy data, and people like sort of a short, quick, easy rule of thumb thing. So I'm going to give you one rule of thumb that the sales boss looks for. And I would say this is across all things. And I'm going to look as much data as I can. But the one thing I'm trying to look for when I'm in an interview and I'm talking to people is I want to find people that are what I label as the happy discontent.
Meaning?
Which means that generally speaking, they're really happy people. Like their outlook on life is happy. Their outlook towards their role, their community, the industry is happy. And yet I can sense there's this deep discontent, meaning they know they could be doing better and they want to progress. So if I get somebody that's a happy discontent, they're going to learn, they're going to strive. I have a lot more going for me in whatever, training I put them in, because the truth about humans is that you will keep humans on your team for as long as they believe that they can do the best work of their life working for you. The moment that's not true, they're going to start looking elsewhere. Their performance is going to slow down. So if your listeners just want a rule of thumb, like how can I immediately, with not plugging in any new technology, not making any, is just looking at the lens of their people through, are they a happy discontent? And I would also add to that, quit caring about how they answer your questions. It's meaningless. The only point of having questions in an interview is so you can observe the person. That's it. I don't care what their answer is. In most cases, I want to be able to see, how do they see the world? What's the lens they're looking at the world through? And then I want to know, how do they handle pressure? How flexible are they at maintaining composure right? When they're in a new setting, when something's unfamiliar, it's really those character things that are going to matter more so than the actual words they used to please me in that interview.
We're almost out of time here, but I got to ask you this one last question. Look, I mean, this is changing very, very quickly. I'm not going to lie. My listeners know this. Like, I'm definitely in the camp that's a little bit more AI skeptical. And I think I can't be the first person who's told you this, Jonathan. It's a little creepy that we're already taking cues on how to build our team from artificial intelligence, how to build our calendars. I mean, forgive me for needing a second to sort of get used to all this. Where do you see this whole trend going in the next 10 years? And I'm not talking about AI generally. I'm talking about AI and hiring specifically.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast on that, and I would share your skepticism in some realms. I would also go back to when we talked about how people define AI. You're very comfortable using spell check on your phone, and you're very comfortable that Uber tells you estimated delivery time for your Uber Eats order. All that's AI.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of that it's more in our face, face now, and we can directly access it. I would say the best outcome for AI and hiring is getting it right more often with people. And I take it not from the employer standpoint, but when a human can early in their life understand what are the things that I'm going to enjoy, that are going to light me up, that are going to give me energy. Because when I can find that earlier, I can save myself some of the heartaches that come from picking the wrong career, getting involved in the wrong thing. So I think of it as a job seeker tool to really understand the kinds of things that I'm going to naturally love and be gifted at. Because when that's the case, I'm happy to spend a lot of time at it.
Jonathan, let's leave it at that for today. I think maybe we should do a part 2. But where can people connect with you if they want to just pick your brain, learn about the Sales Boss, learn about WhoHire? What are what's your digital footprint? Where should people go?
Yeah, I'm the only Jonathan Whistman out there, so you can Google me. You'll find me almost anywhere. But the easiest way to get me, and you can put this in the show notes, is my email, john@whohire.com. And I do answer all of those. I have an assistant, but I get back to 100% of people that reach out to me.
I do not. That's very impressive. Good for you. I got to work on that 100% reply rate. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's, by the way, you should do the same thing. Your listeners should make sure they do the same thing with candidates that are coming in. And that's where automation tools like WhoHire can help. We're in the environment where people's standards are higher. They're used to the Uber Eats. They're used to app. How long is the car going to get there? And when you ask them to do something and there's no here's what you can expect from us. So I think right at the front end, your contractors need to be able to say, look, if you apply, we're going to get back to you within 48 hours with a yes, no, or next step every time, all the way to we're hiring you or we're not hiring you. And we expect the entire process to take 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it is. And these are the 4 stages you're going to go through. Yeah. And here's where you're at in that process. If you can't give that sort of clarity and promise to applicants, you're going to get the leftovers for applicants.
Ain't that the truth? Dude, thank you so much for the time today. This has been really enlightening. I learned a ton. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Enjoyed our time.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Contractor Evolution. If you've already subscribed to our channel, consider sharing this episode with another contractor who you think needs to hear it.